So what happens when a world that's built on absolute certainty starts to crack at its very foundations? When faith, social order, even the whole point of art are all suddenly thrown into question. Well, long before the final collapse, the poets of the Victorian era were like seismographs, capturing every single tremor of a world that was coming apart. And their story really begins with a choice.
Let's start with this single, haunting line. It's a cry of frustration from a mysterious artist, and it perfectly captures the central conflict of the age, that painful choice between the beautiful, safe world of art and the dangerous, messy, but vibrant world of reality. Okay, so the guy who wrote that line, that was Alfred Lord Tennyson. He was the poet laureate, the official voice of the entire British Empire, and his poetry was polished, majestic. You get the picture. But just beneath that shiny surface, his work is absolutely filled with this deep personal anxiety about where an artist even fits in a world that's changing so fast.
The poem's main idea is this. The Lady of Shalott, who's basically the artist figure, is trapped in a tower. There's a curse on her that says she can't look directly at the world. Instead, she has to watch life unfold as reflections in a mirror, and then she weaves what she sees into this beautiful tapestry. So she's creating art, sure, but it's always secondhand, always one step removed from the real thing.
And then, bam! Everything changes. Sir Lancelot gallops into the mirror. This guy is pure life force. He's described as dazzling, flashing, singing tiralira. He's just a meteor of sound and color, and he represents everything she's missing out on. Passion, action, real direct experience. And the pole is just irresistible.
And of course, she looks. And in that one instant, the curse hits. The mirror cracks right down the middle, the tapestry unravels and flies out the window. Her gift is just gone. To experience reality, she had to sacrifice her art, and the only thing she gets to create in the real world is her own death. A tragic swan song as she floats down the river, a beautiful corpse for the very world she so desperately wanted to join.
Okay, so Tennyson's poem totally nails the anxiety of the individual artist. But there was a much, much bigger crisis brewing. One that would isolate not just the poet, but basically everyone. The very bedrock of Western society, that unquestioning religious faith, was starting to crumble. For centuries, you have to understand, this was how people saw the world, and John Donne said it beautifully. Humanity was like a single continent, all connected by a shared faith in a divine plan. You were never really alone because you were part of God's huge design. And then, you get this. Just 200 years later, the poet Matthew Arnold gives us this terrifyingly different vision. The continent has completely shattered. Now, we're all just millions of lonely little islands, separated by this vast, isolating sea. So, the big question is, what on earth happened in between?
Well, Arnold gave this crisis its most famous image in his poem Dover Beach. He imagined faith as this protective sea that used to wrap around the whole world, giving everyone a sense of safety and certainty. But now, with all these new scientific discoveries in geology and biology poking holes in the biblical story of creation, that sea was pulling back. And it was leaving humanity stranded, exposed, and totally alone on the shores of a world that maybe didn't mean anything.
So, in a world without God watching over your shoulder to pass judgment, poets started to explore this dark and really fascinating new territory, the twisted inner landscape of the human mind itself.
And the absolute master of this was Robert Browning, and his favorite tool was the dramatic monologue. Think of it like a psychological crime scene. You, the reader, are the detective, and you get to listen in on one side of a conversation. The person speaking is trying to make themselves look as good as possible, but as they keep talking, the mask slips, and they accidentally reveal the chilling truth of who they really are.
So let's meet one of his most famous creations, the Duke of Ferrara. He's showing off a portrait of his late wife to a guy who's there to arrange his next marriage. And he starts complaining that she was too soon made glad, that she smiled at everyone and everything. He couldn't control her when she was alive, so he gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. Chilling, right? He basically just admitted he had her killed, turning a living, breathing woman into a piece of art that he can control.
And get this, right after dropping that bombshell, while his guest is probably speechless, the Duke casually points out another piece of art, a statue of the sea god Neptune taming a wild seahorse. I mean, that's his whole philosophy right there in one image. Powerful men exist to dominate and tame the wild, beautiful nature of women. It's a terrifying look inside a mind that is just obsessed with power and possession.
But as this old patriarchal world started to show some serious cracks, a revolutionary new voice emerged to challenge it. Elizabeth Barrett Browning didn't just write poetry, she took the very forms that men had used to objectify women and she made them her own.
Okay, so think about the love sonnet. For hundreds of years, it was a guy's game, right? A man would write about how beautiful and perfect some silent, distant woman was. But Elizabeth Barrett Browning comes along and just flips the whole thing on its head. In her poems, the woman is the speaker. She's the one who feels, who desires, who demands. She turns a tool of objectification into a megaphone for her own voice.
And I mean, just listen to this voice. This isn't passive or idealized. It's urgent, it's direct, it's so passionate. She's not just sitting around waiting to be praised. She is actively demanding that her lover tell her he loves her, over and over. For a woman to write this, to demand this in the Victorian era, that was absolutely revolutionary.
All right, let's recap. We've got artists questioning reality, faith is collapsing, psychology is getting darker, and women's voices are finally being heard. This long, slow unraveling of the Victorian mind, it all comes to a head in the literal, physical demolition of their entire world, the industrial-scale slaughter of World War I.
Now, when the war first kicked off, this was the kind of stuff people were writing. Poetry, like this famous sonnet by Rupert Brooke, sold the idea that war was a noble, clean, and patriotic sacrifice. Dying for your country was a beautiful, almost romantic act that would make a little piece of France or Belgium eternally English. And then came the reality, straight from the trenches. This is from the soldier poet Wilfred Owen. There is nothing clean or romantic here. This is the absolute horror of a gas attack, described with unflinching, brutal detail. This isn't noble. It's a slow, agonizing death by suffocation.
What Owen does here is he just systematically rips apart every romantic idea about being a soldier. His men aren't knights in shining armor. They're broken, exhausted creatures who are just reduced to their most basic physical suffering. They're old beggars and hags, limping on feet that are raw with blood. There is zero glory here. It's all been replaced by pure, physical degradation.
And Owen saves his most devastating blow for the very end. He quotes a famous line from the Roman poet Horace, "Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori." And then he delivers the final verdict. That phrase, which means it is sweet and fitting to die for one's country, isn't some noble truth. He calls it what it is, the old lie.
So from Tennyson's Lonely Argist all the way to Owen's Shattered Soldier, these poets tracked the collapse of one world and the painful birth of our modern one. And their journey from certainty to doubt leaves us with a really critical question for our own time. In our own age of new technologies and new conflicts, of social media and propaganda, how do we learn to spot the difference between a noble cause and a beautiful, deadly lie?